Welcome everyone to Finest Women in Real Estate. Finest Women in Real Estate has a number of shows, but today we're going to be concentrating on real estate, and particularly how to protect yourself in a real estate transaction. I'm your host, Fred Eckert, President of the San Diego Creative Investors Association, and with me today is a wonderful guest, and we're going to learn a lot of information to protect you, to help you. So I'm here with Rachel LaMar, sitting right next to me, and Rachel has been a real estate broker for 17 years, but she's also an attorney, and has been an attorney for 24 years. So Rachel, welcome.
Thank you.
I do know a few facts about you, Rachel. So you're married, and you have 2 grown children, which seems almost impossible given how young you look. So let's start with this. We want to help protect people, and many people have made lots of mistakes when they bought a home and later regret it. So start with what you think is one of the biggest things that people need to know about when they're buying a home.
Okay, the biggest thing is the dual agency dilemma, and in case someone doesn't know what that is, dual agency is when a buyer is represented by the same agent who's also representing the seller. Now, as an agent representing a party, you have a fiduciary duty to that party. So what happens is, if you are a listing agent, you have a fiduciary duty to protect the seller. But then all of a sudden, if you're also representing the buyer, there could be some problems. For example, you may know some information from the seller that you can't disclose. But as a fiduciary, you have to disclose. In other states, this isn't allowed. And if you think of it as a court, if you were being sued, you would not, well, you wouldn't be able to, it's not allowed, but you wouldn't want to be represented by the same attorney who is representing the other party, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So a lot of buyers think that they're going to get a much better deal if they work with the listing agent, because the listing agent can cut commission and it would save money and both parties would save money. But the reality is that you really need to have your own representation to protect yourself. And
let me throw this out, and I'd like you to comment on this, because I believe what happens is at an open house, there are these wonderful agents who are representing the seller because they're at the listing. And buyers seem to think, well, if I go to that person, I'll get a better deal.
Exactly.
Correct? So talk a little bit more about that, and how would you suggest then somebody protects himself since dual agency exists? What would you suggest they do?
Well, I just think people need to steer clear of it. And I think a lot of agents, and unfortunately in the business, a lot of agents who are a dual agent don't realize the legal ramifications that comes along with that. So I think it's the buyer needs to really protect themselves, because it's a legal, this is a legal transaction. We're dealing with legal documentation.
So maybe ask the agent, are they a dual agent or not, before you sign up with somebody?
So I don't think the dual agency should be allowed at all. I think the buyer should be informed, and they should know that they really need to get their own agent to protect their interests.
I agree 100%.
So it's okay to go to the open house and talk to the agent, but
one of the things I've always suggested is you have your own agent, your buyer's agent, and they should encourage people to go around and look, but as soon as you find a house you like, you text your agent or call your agent and have them make the offer. I think that's a smart move,
it's a great idea.
Okay, so I think the other part of this that maybe is really important for people to know is disclosures and what they need to look for with disclosures. So what should a buyer be looking for when a seller is going to sell a home? What kind of disclosures should they expect? What should they be looking for as maybe red flags in those disclosures?
Right. So disclosures are one of the main causes of lawsuits in real estate is negligence and failure to disclose. I've been in the business almost 17 years, coming up on the 17-year anniversary, and just last year I had my first 2 cases where I represented the buyers, and there was failure to disclose. So I think when you receive the disclosures, first of all, you should sit down with your agent and really look through them thoroughly. And also, once you have your home inspection and you can look through the disclosures, and for example, if the home inspector points something out that, you know, oh, there's a leak, there's a stain on the ceiling, and you don't see anything in the disclosures, then you want to make sure to ask the agent for more information about that.
So it might not be, it might be something that the inspector picked up but was not in the disclosures, for example, correct?
Could be, or just maybe something you even see yourself that, hey, there's a stain on the ceiling, why isn't that in here?
All right, and what would you say if you're, because we're really talking about buyers, but what would buyers, what types of disclosures should they be looking for? What topics should those disclosures cover?
Well, here in California, we have many disclosures, but the 2 really important disclosures are the transfer disclosure statement and the seller property questionnaire. So both of those documents have a series of questions, and in both of them, they kind of cross. Some of them have the similar questions, but they ask a lot of very specific questions about the home, such as, have you had any, any problems with different systems, or have you had any insurance claims, things like that.
Okay.
So if for example, if someone checks off, yes, we had an insurance claim, and they didn't provide you with the documentation, then you need to get that. So just to make sure it was handled properly.
Right.
So it's just important, like I said, to sit down with the agent and really go through the disclosures and kind of compare with what you see with your naked eye and what the inspector tells you as well.
Okay. All right. So here's I throw this out a little example that I didn't know when I bought a house, my first house in Coronado, first full house in Coronado. The sewer was actually tied to the neighbor's sewer. So I found out the hard way when her sewer backed, or her tub backed up, my property backed up.
Right.
Had I known that, I probably would have asked for that to be separated before I bought the house.
Exactly.
So that would have been a disclosure.
Exactly.
I don't know that the seller knew that at the time, but still it would have been a nice disclosure to know about.
Yes.
All right. So in your experience, what are other things that a buyer might do at this stage when they're first looking? They haven't opened escrow yet. They're just making the offer. What are the things you think they might do to help not only protect themselves legally, but just to protect themselves from making a mistake?
Just want to make sure that you hire a really good home inspector. I know we're going to talk about that in another episode, but just basically, there are a lot of them out there, and if you don't know of one, I would ask your real estate agent for a referral, because for example, the home inspector I use is also, not only the owner of the company is a home inspector and a licensed contractor and a civil engineer.
Okay. Oh.
So he has a lot of expertise, and he might see things that others don't see.
Sure.
And also, I think, there are many different forms on those home inspections. I like the reports where they actually go into detail on everything, not just the check boxes.
Right.
That's just my personal preference.
Sure, sure.
But I think, the more information, that's really important, because then you kind of learn about the home. Now, if you find out that, hey, you might want to look into this further, or the roof is 30 years old, then you need to go and do further investigations and have those experts come out. But I
Sure.
think it's really important to be thorough in.
Right. Because it'd be helpful to know 30-year roof is probably the standard for most of them. I have a 50-year roof on my house, but still, if it was 40 years old when I was selling it, I'd want to know that. Anything about solar systems? I know there's a difference whether somebody's paid for it or whether they're leasing it.
Right.
So what about that? It's not necessarily a legal issue, but it might be.
Well, I'm not an expert on solar, but I do know that with the homes that I have sold, I just sold one with solar, and it's very beneficial. And a lot of appraisers tell me that it's just getting to the point where it's starting to add value.
Right, right.
So I think a lot of people are looking for that, and they like that. And but yes, if a solar system is leased, you really do have to investigate, what your responsibilities are going to be, how much you're going to owe, and all those kind of things before you get into it. It's obviously preferable to have one that is owned.
That's paid off, yeah. Well, actually, in the title business, it's called a UCC, which is a filing, so it's actually a lien on the property if you buy it.
Oh, right.
And I've been told that actually with solar, if you don't want it, you could ask to have it removed, which to me, I'm not sure if I would do that because of the possible damage to the house.
Right. Interesting.
All right. Well, we're going to be finishing up here on this particular segment pretty soon, but I think the last thing I'd like to ask you is, in your own experience, when you first bought your home, before you were in this business, would this information have helped you? What you're explaining right now?
Well, my mother was a big real estate agent, so I knew a lot of this. But definitely, because I work with a lot of first-time home buyers, and a lot of them really, they need their hands held. They need to understand what they're doing from when they start looking for homes to all the way to the closing and beyond. So I think as an agent, you really have to help them understand all these things. And a lot of times they get the disclosures and they say, well, this looks fine. But as an agent, you need to help them look through each thing and compare
And
with what you
understand it.
see and what you get from your inspector, and make sure they have answers to all their questions.
Do you recommend that a person have their own home inspection and possibly even their own appraisal before they buy?
Well, the buyers usually, if they're getting a loan, the lender sends out an appraiser. So it is their appraisal.
Okay.
I think that yes, the buyer should definitely have a home inspection. So like I said, you want to make sure you find a really seasoned and a seasoned home inspector to help you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I know we're going to have an exciting little break here coming up. Yeah. So tell us what to expect. Well, I'll leave that to you folks. Tell us what to expect on our break. We're going to stop now, but we're going to come back and we're going to talk about homeowners associations and what you need to know about them. This is Finest Women in Real Estate. We'll be back shortly. Well, welcome back, folks. Back to Finest Women in Real Estate. It's our real estate section. Today we have this wonderful guest who spoke earlier about contingencies and also about how to protect yourself legally when you're buying a home. Dual agency we covered. We're going to cover a lot more, so stay tuned for this next segment. Rachel LaMar, real estate broker, real estate attorney, all around nice person, and so far so very educational for everybody. So here's what we want to do. I think the next segment we're going to talk about HOAs, when people buy in an HOA, which is not necessarily always a condo. So why don't you take it from there?
Okay. So a lot of communities are HOA communities, especially here in Southern California. And basically, for those that don't know, it just means that you are paying every month a certain fee in order to take care of usually common areas. And it can be a condo, or it can also be a home that has, for example, I live in an HOA community, so we have a community pool and a gate and all those things. So those are what the fees are covered. Now, HOA documents, when you get into a contract to buy a home, you usually receive, well, now they tend to email them, but it used to be where they would mail these huge packet of information. And it's extremely boring because it contains all the minutes of the meetings and such. I think I've only had, I was thinking about this on the way here, one client I know of who read through the entire packet. So what I always tell my clients is that you really do need to try to read the packet, but if you don't want to read through all the minutes and such, the most important things to focus on are that the HOA has sufficient reserves in case there's a problem. You also want to look at whether it's noted in any of the meetings that there's going to be a dues increase in the future, because
for some type of improvement, or
because usually your loan is approved for a certain number, and of course it affects your monthly nut, so you need to know that, and whether there are going to be any assessments coming up. Now, usually assessments could be in a home community, like if they need to resurface the swimming pool, in a HOA, in a condo community, if they're going to redo the roofs, things like that.
Well, there was an unexpected one, from my own personal knowledge, down in the Cays in Coronado, and I think each homeowner was assessed like $30,000 at one time fee. It was a lot of money. All right, so here's the thing I would ask you then. We have the HOA docs, which are the minutes and meetings and so forth like that. They also have CC&Rs.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that real briefly?
Well, CC&Rs are the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that are
well,
inherent they're part of the HOA community. So you have to, as a homeowner within the HOA community, you have to know what those are. They'll tell you, for example, whether you can, work on your car in your driveway, or whether you can paint your garage, football team colors, or things like that.
Pets and so forth.
Yeah, pets and that kind of a thing. So it's really important, definitely, to read through the CC&Rs and to read all of that information.
I would also add, I know a lot of associations put out rules and regulations, such as, it might not be in the CC&Rs about pets at that point, but they add it, saying you can't have a dog that's over 30 pounds. Or, right?
Yes, I've had that happen before. I actually had an escrow canceled because somebody had a dog over 25 pounds. And it wasn't allowed in the community, which was kind of silly. But
and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, state law says that a community cannot restrict you from having a dog, a cat, or I want to say another type of domestic animal, but they can make rules about the size or types of those pets.
I believe you're correct.
I think that's correct. And that's important for people to know, because if you're buying a condo, again, it was not too many years ago when somebody was going to buy a condo that I knew about, and they were told they could not have a pet at all. So I quickly pointed out the law to them, and they were good. All right, well, let's talk about, say, contingencies then.
Okay.
In particular, contingencies that could be for a regular home, but also for an HOA.
Yeah. So contingencies are inherent within your contract, in your purchase contract. And so what that means is that you have certain timeframes by which you and also the seller have to complete certain things within, under the purchase contract. So as a buyer, your main contingency periods are going to be is standard in the California Residential Purchase Agreement, that you have 17 days to remove your investigation contingencies. So unless you shorten or extend that period of time, during that 17 days, that's when you would get your home inspection and any other inspections that you feel are necessary. And so it's really important to just, make sure. A lot of people shorten their contingencies when they write offers because they think, the seller will like that better and accept it if it's shorter. So you just want to make sure that you have enough time to do all your investigations. And even with a shortened contingency period, you can do it. But I always recommend to my clients that they do those they do the initial home inspection right away.
Correct.
Right away after they get an offer accepted.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're going to know if you need to do anything else.
And don't be pressured into shortening that time frame if you need more time, because
Exactly.
you might need a lot more time.
And you can always ask for more time. I mean, you know, some sellers don't like that, but contingency period is there to protect the buyer.
Right. So, and my assessment of something like that would be, in a market where it's a buyer's market as opposed to a seller's market, I think you'd be in a little better shape to be able to say, hey, I'd like a little lot more time, because they don't want to lose you as a buyer.
Possibly, but I think what I see mostly is I haven't really seen extensions on contingency periods. More often, people are shortening those just to get through with them and get them. You know, we know what the problem or problems might be, so that we can negotiate any repairs that are necessary and move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always good. That's where the home inspection comes in, along with these contingencies. Okay.
And then we also have the loan contingency and the appraisal contingency.
Yes, there's a bunch of contingencies that everybody needs to know about. All right. How about this then? When people are buying a house, well, I have two things. One, you talked about making an offer. This is my personal thing that I don't like, because I'm also in the title business, is when people put in seller's choice for title. I think that's a horrible mistake. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, so the thing is as you probably know, most often the seller or the seller's agent will choose the title company, because when you take the listing, if you're smart, you call your title rep on the phone right away and you say, pull title on the, I do before I take a listing, because you want to make sure there's no problems with title. Yep. So with that, and having, you know, your title rep on board already, usually most people will, you know, not bulk if the seller chooses the title person.
I don't think a lot of people, buyers, really know, or sellers know really what title is or what they're using. So I asked that question because there are differences in title insurance companies and title agents. So
definitely.
All right. Well, enough of that. All right. I know another interesting thing for people is you're going to buy this home. How do you take, and I use the word title. How should you, the legal term I think is, how is it going to be vested? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So there are different ways to take title. Some people take title as joint tenants, which means that, let's say there's two people on title. If one dies, then the other one would have a right of survivorship under joint tenancy. So the property would revert to that person. Tenants in common is good if you are maybe buying the house with some partners or some friends and there's no right of survivorship. You can will away your share. And then, of course, there's a trust. And these are kind of, I think, the three main
Every once in a while you'll see an LLC possibly.
Exactly. But I always recommend to all my clients that they take title in the form of a trust if they are married, if they have a family, because if something happens to one of the people, then there is a specific definition as to what's going to happen to that property. And if you have kids, you should have a lot of other things in there too.
Absolutely. But we talked actually before the show, just briefly, about how some of these famous movie stars passed away, not only not a trust, but not even a will. And in my own personal thing, when my wife passed away, we did have a trust, and it made it really relatively simple. That portion of it was a lot simpler, so it takes a lot of, you don't have to worry about all these other things going on. So I think it's very important. All right, so given that, now I asked you earlier about if you knew, if somebody, say, bought a property as partners, tenants in common, and then, so they did not get a homeowner's policy of title insurance, but then they transferred it to, say, a trust or some other entity. I mentioned to you, and I wanted to comment on it, was that you might have to check title, or check for an endorsement if you needed one to make sure you still had good coverage. So have you seen that at all or not?
I haven't personally seen that. I've seen the opposite, which we talked about, where someone goes from owning a home to making it an investment property when they go to purchase another home. But yeah, I think anytime you're going to make any change in title, or if you're moving out of a home or moving into a home that was an investment, either way, you always want to check with your title rep.
You should, yes. A lot of people, now, see, here's the thing. That's probably going to be something that homeowner probably does not know that title rep, so they're just going to have to ask the title company. But you do, and with the other one comment I would say, I run across this a lot, people don't know where their title policy is, and they don't know where all the documentation is for when they bought.
Good thing the title companies have all those records.
We do have those records. All right, folks, well, listen, folks, we're going to take a quick break, but Finest Women will be back, and we'll do our little wrap-up, and stay tuned. You're going to get some more information with our wonderful guest, Rachel.
It appears these hot ashes are about to be dumped, which could possibly start a wildfire. How will Smokey deal with such a hot situation? The garden hose defense. Next, a thorough stir. Then another spray. And finally, feeling if the ashes are cool.
Oh, yeah.
Ah yes, the selfie. A ritual practiced so frequently with this tribe, but not so much by Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back, everyone, to Finest Women in Real Estate. We're here for this wonderful real estate segment. We have Rachel LaMar, both attorney and real estate broker. She's given some awesome advice so far. We're going to wrap this up a little bit and cover a few more things. So, Rachel, first of all, I want you to do this with me here. You've been so good. Pick up your cup and let's do a little dry toast to Finest Women in Real Estate and to your presence here.
Thank
all right.
you.
All right, folks. So, I know people sometimes will want to use, or they're pressured to use, a relative. What are your thoughts on that? Or a relative to buy their home.
How long do we have? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I think obviously it always seems to be a great benefit to work with a family or a friend, right? Because they're going to save you money and this and that. But I've seen it happen time and time again. In fact, I just took a listing that was listed with a family member. Didn't work out. So I think the important thing to remember is you really need a neutral party who's going to take care of you. And a lot of times with a family or friend, especially if they're not getting paid much or they're just doing it as a favor. Sometimes, like any time when you work with a family or friend, sometimes things can kind of go under the, go sour.
You can lose a friendship.
Exactly.
Even. Sure.
Exactly.
Sure,
so I think it's really important to have someone representing you who's going to be your fiduciary and have your interests at heart and take care of you in the transaction.
And we talked, so this is I think is an important part of this also, is that typically there are dual agents, which we already said maybe is not the best way to go.
Right.
But a lot of times agents will focus on being a listing agent and others will focus on being a buyer's agent. And I think it goes without saying that probably you'd recommend get a good buyer's agent who's knowledgeable, right, and who has a good handle, maybe has some experience about what to do. Yeah.
I mean, there definitely are agents who just work the listing side and agents who just work with buyers. I do both, but I think, again, it's just really going to come down to someone you feel comfortable with, someone who really understands the contract, who understands, the legal ramifications of the contract, who is first and foremost going to hold your hand and walk you, especially with first-time buyers, walk you through the whole transaction. And that's from day one. That's from even before you get into contract. But when you get into contract, you need to have a time frame. You need to know when all your deadlines are. You need to schedule everything that you have to take care of. There's a lot of things to remember. And sometimes with a family and a friend, they may not communicate these things to you. So it's definitely to your benefit. And as a buyer, you're not paying the agent, the seller pays the agent. So it's definitely to your benefit to have somebody representing your interests. Okay. Just your interests.
So that being said, then you don't see it very often, but let's talk quickly about a FSBO, for sale by owner.
Okay.
For sale by owner typically does not have an agent representing them. They might have the property on the MLS, but they're probably not getting any advice from a professional agent. So I think at that point it would be even more critical then to have a good buyer's agent, or, and what leads us into the next part, how about using an attorney? If you're going to buy, say, a FSBO or even a regular property.
Sometimes with the for sale by owner properties, the problem becomes whether the seller wants to even pay out a commission. So sometimes they'll advertise it and say, we're not paying a commission. And so it's really unfortunate because how are you going to be represented at all as a buyer if you don't have someone looking out for your best interest? So in that case, yes, hiring an attorney is probably going to be a lot more expensive, but well, definitely, because again, as a buyer, you're not paying for the real estate agent's commission. But it is something that you can do, and if you are buying a property that doesn't let you work with an agent, I would highly, or you could also pay your agent to do it. Right. If you have a good broker or agent who knows what they're doing, and but I would definitely recommend that in having an attorney review your documentation.
Okay. One of the things that I always thought was a smart thing to do was to have the buyer review the purchase agreement well before they start signing things.
Yeah.
In other words, to see everything that's on there. In fact, I've always recommended, if I'm working with a buyer or a seller, I give them both.
Right.
Depending on the agent. I give them both that because the seller might see that for the first time also. So I think that's important. Do you have any thoughts on that about, if they don't have one initially, should they ask for one from their buyer's agent? A blank copy of the purchase agreement so they can look through?
Well, you're required to give them a copy of the purchase agreement that
After
they sign.
it,
Yeah,
right.
but yes, I mean, it's always smart if you want to look through the purchase. What I do is I fill out the purchase agreement and then I tell my buyers, look, I'm happy to go through this with you. A lot of them are seasons and they don't want to go through it. But I have had some first-time buyers where we've sat down and we've gone through the contract and I've explained, especially when you're talking about arbitration and mediation and they want to know, what am I signing off here? So it's very important to read through the contract. Most people don't want to. And again, it's written by lawyers, so there's a lot of legalese and it's sometimes hard for the average person to understand what the heck they're saying in these papers. But it's important, and that's what your real estate agent is there to help you with.
Well, so I'm going to give you my quick final thoughts. First of all, it's been an absolute delight to have you on the show, and I think our audience is probably experiencing the same thing. So hope I meet you again in person. So it's that kind of a thing. The advice you got today was fabulous advice. I encourage you to ask many questions of your agent. If you do need an attorney, ask for one. Make sure you cover that contract, make sure you take your time, and be concerned about when you buy a property that you're covering all the bases that Rachel mentioned. And Rachel, thank you so much for being on the show. I want to follow up and thank our sponsors, not only Finest Women in Real Estate, but Fire Up Connect. We also have EAN TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV. They're all places that you can watch this. There's plenty of social media. Check Twitter and check Facebook. And by the way, this show will also be shown on YouTube. Not right away, but you'll see it on YouTube also. So follow Finest Women in Real Estate. If you have questions, particularly if it's through Facebook or Twitter, ask questions. You'll get your answers by some professionals. Thank you very much.